Right now, somewhere in the world, a government is signing a deal to connect its entire country to the internet, and for the first time in years, it is not calling an American company to do it. It is calling China. Same service beamed down from space, same dishes on the same rooftops, but a completely different flag on the satellite overhead. And the countries making that call are not doing it because China's network is bigger or faster. It is not. They are doing it because they have quietly realized something the West spent 2 years ignoring. The thing that matters most about internet from space is not the technology, it is who can switch it off. Here is the number that should stop you cold. As of the middle of 2026, Starlink has more than 10,400 active satellites in orbit. China's two biggest rivals, added together, have fewer than 400, not 10% of Starlink's fleet, not a quarter. Roughly 3 to 4%. So when a headline says China built a Starlink killer, the obvious reaction is to laugh, because on the only number everyone was watching, China is not close. 3% does not kill anything. Now, the title of this video says Starlink killer, and we need to be honest about what that means, because the truth is far more interesting than the hype. On raw satellite count, on fleet size, on the scoreboard everyone kept staring at, China is losing badly, and will keep losing for years. But on the thing that actually decides who controls the sky, China just changed the rules so completely that the American lead might not matter the way everyone assumed. If you enjoy stories about technology quietly flipping the balance of power upside down, hit like and subscribe so you never miss one. Now, let us get into how this actually happened, because it starts with everyone watching the wrong number, why nobody took China seriously. To understand why this caught the West off guard, you have to understand the story Silicon Valley and Washington told themselves for years. The story was simple and comforting. The satellite internet race was an American affair. It was Starlink versus Amazon's Project Kuiper versus a handful of smaller Western players. Whoever launched the most satellites fastest and cheapest would own the sky. It was treated as a law of nature. More satellites, more coverage, more control. And America, with reusable rockets and a 5-year head start, controlled the launches. And on the raw numbers, that logic looked airtight. China's programs kept stumbling. Deployment paused for several months in 2025 after some satellites suffered thruster and gyroscope failures in orbit, only resuming in April 2026 after corrective work. The international body that governs orbital spectrum, the ITU, requires operators to launch at least 10% of a planned constellation by certain deadlines to hold onto their frequency rights, and China was visibly behind schedule. Western coverage looked at all of this, saw a country tripping over its own launch manifest, and concluded there was nothing to worry about. The comparison did not flatter China either. Starlink had that 5-year head start and a fleet of reusable rockets that let SpaceX launch again and again for a fraction of the cost. China's early launches leaned on rockets that are thrown away after every single flight. When your competitor reuses a booster dozens of times and you cannot, the math on cost and speed looks brutal. Every serious assessment concluded the same thing. Even with money and government muscle behind it, China simply could not launch fast enough or cheaply enough to catch up. That was the consensus. What nobody in that comfortable position stopped to ask was a dangerous question. What if China was never trying to win the race everyone was watching? The assumption that backfired. This is where the story turns, and it turns on a hidden assumption baked into every Western analysis. Everyone assumed the goal was to beat Starlink at Starlink's own game. More satellites, faster launches, a bigger fleet. Measured that way, China was losing, and losing badly. But that entire framing rested on treating this like a business, judged by market share and subscriber numbers. China was not building a business the way a company does, it was building infrastructure the way a state does, and those are two completely different things with two completely different scoreboards. In the early 2020s, China merged a scatter of competing provincial and experimental satellite projects into a single national strategy run by state-owned enterprises, and it talked about the result not as a product, but as digital sovereignty. Information infrastructure treated as a matter of national security, like a power grid or a border. When a country treats internet the way it treats defense, it does not care whether the balance sheet looks good next quarter. It cares whether the network can be shut off by someone else. The moment you understand that, the satellite count stops being the point, and a completely different story comes into focus. Two constellations, one strategy, because China did not build one Starlink rival, it built two, and they do completely different jobs. The first is Guowang, whose name translates to National Network. It is run by a state-owned enterprise called China SatNet, and it is planned to reach nearly 13,000 satellites. Guowang is the sovereign backbone, built for China's own telecommunications and national defense. Top-down, secretive, and not for sale to anyone. The second is Qianfan, which means thousand sails. You may also see it called Space Sail. It is run by a Shanghai company, backed by the city government and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, with a planned fleet of over 15,000 satellites by 2030. And Qianfan is the one that matters for the rest of the world because Qianfan is explicitly built for export. It produces around 500 satellites a year, and its entire reason for existing is to sell sovereign internet access to countries that do not want to depend on an American company. One constellation locks down China's own skies. The other goes shopping for allies. That split is not a copy of the SpaceX playbook. It is a geopolitical weapon disguised as a telecom service. And whatever the earlier stumbles, the pace has been picking up hard. Over 100 Chinese satellites went up from the Hainan spaceport in 2025 across both programs. Qianfan crossed a national milestone in the middle of 2026 when it passed 200 satellites in orbit after a run of back-to-back launches, some carrying 18 satellites at a time. Guowang, for its part, has been placing its satellites in higher orbital shells, around 900 and 1,100 kilometers up, with plans to fill in lower orbits later. Neither is anywhere near Starlink, but a program that looked stalled in 2025 was, by the middle of 2026, launching in batches almost every week. The trajectory bent sharply upward at exactly the moment the West had written it off, and a curve that's steep is a very different thing from a snapshot. The pitch nobody in the West made. Here is the part most coverage glosses over. Qianfan is not selling faster internet or cheaper internet, it is selling independence. And it turns out a surprising number of governments are extremely interested in buying exactly that. As of the middle of 2026, Qianfan's operator has signed agreements or entered talks with roughly 30 countries, among them Brazil, Malaysia, Thailand, Kazakhstan, Turkey, and South Africa. These are not random markets. These are countries that, for political or strategic reasons, would rather not route their national connectivity through a company owned by a single American billionaire. And it fits a pattern China has been building for a decade. Many of these countries are already partners in the Belt and Road Initiative, China's sprawling global infrastructure program, and satellite internet slots neatly into what Beijing calls its digital Silk Road. The idea is simple. If China lays the roads, the ports, and now the connectivity a country runs on, influence follows the infrastructure. A satellite network is the ultimate version of that. Once a nation's remote regions come online through your constellation, switching providers means ripping out and replacing an entire layer of national plumbing. The lock-in is not a contract clause. It is physics and habit combined, and it is exactly the kind of dependence that lasts for generations. And the first domino has already fallen. In February 2026, Brazil's telecom regulator granted Qianfan's operator the right to run its satellites over Brazilian territory, authorizing an initial batch with a license valid until 2031. The stated goal is to bring connectivity to remote regions like the Amazon, where fiber optic cable simply does not reach. Brazil is expected to become Qianfan's first commercial market, the first place outside China where you will be able to buy this service, and the operator has already signaled it wants to expand well beyond that opening batch. One country at a time, China is building a customer base that Starlink's 10,000 satellites cannot automatically win, because the thing these customers want is not more bandwidth. It is a supplier who is not Elon Musk. It helps that the timing has been almost perfect. Starlink has had public friction with South Africa over local ownership laws, a dispute that turned unusually personal in public. As Western relationships with parts of the developing world have grown tense over tariffs and aid, China has had a clean opening to walk in and offer an alternative. Qianfan has already registered in South Africa. In market after market, the sales pitch writes itself. Same service from the sky, different flag behind it, and no dependence on a company whose owner makes headlines every week. But is the technology actually good? Now, the honest and important part, because geopolitics means nothing if the network does not work. And here the picture is more nuanced than either the hype or the dismissals suggest. For years, the West held a real technical edge on the capabilities that make modern satellite internet work, and China was genuinely behind. But it has been quietly closing that gap on exactly the features that matter most, and closing it far faster than anyone predicted. Take laser inter-satellite links, the beams of infrared light satellites used to talk directly to each other in space instead of bouncing every message down to a ground station and back. This is the technology that turns a scattered fleet into a single, seamless mesh network, and it used to be a Western advantage. In early 2026, Chinese institutions demonstrated public inter-satellite laser links reaching up to 100 gigabits per second in controlled tests. And in March 2026, a team from the Chinese Academy of Sciences pulled off something even harder. Using a telescope in Yunnan province, they locked a laser onto a satellite more than 40,000 kilometers above the Earth in just 4 seconds, and held that link steady for over 3 hours, moving data both directions. Establishing a stable laser connection across that distance and holding it that long is a genuine milestone. Then there is the feature that scares the incumbents the most, direct-to-cell, the ability for an ordinary phone to connect straight to a satellite with no dish at all. In June 2026, a Qianfan launch carried a dedicated direct-to-cell test satellite into orbit, flying alongside a satellite from China Mobile. That is China's telecom giants openly testing the exact phone-to-satellite capability SpaceX has been rolling out in the West. And China went further still, validating in 2025 the integration of its satellite broadband directly with its ground-based 5G networks, with an eye on 6G welding space, air, and ground into one continuous system. None of these breakthroughs made front-page news abroad. Each one on its own looks like a lab result. Put together, they are a country methodically acquiring every single piece it needs while everyone else stares at the scoreboard of satellite counts. It is worth being honest about the limits. China is still years behind on scale. Its terminals are heavy proprietary units rather than sleek flat dishes, and end-to-end performance on long routes still trails a mature Starlink. This is not China overtaking anyone in 2026. But overtaking was never the point. The point was to build a credible, sovereign, technically real alternative. And on that measure, the gap that everyone assumed was permanent is closing far faster than the West planned for. And think about the shape of the actual decision a government faces, because this is where good enough beats best. A country trying to connect a remote province does not need the single most advanced satellite network on Earth. It needs one that works at a price it can afford, from a partner it trusts that cannot be switched off in a political dispute. The moment you frame it that way, Starlink's technical lead stops being the deciding factor. A network that is 90% as good, but fully under your own control, beats a network that is 100% as good, but owned by a foreign billionaire who answers to a foreign government. For a growing list of nations, that trade is not close. They will take sovereignty over raw performance every single time, and China built its entire pitch around knowing they would. The land grab nobody expected. There is one more layer to this, and it is the part that should genuinely unsettle Washington, because it turns China's low satellite count from a weakness into a weapon. Low Earth orbit is not infinite. There are a limited number of useful orbital slots and a limited amount of radio spectrum, and both are handed out on a first-come, first-served basis by international agreement. Every satellite China launches is not just a data relay. It is a claim staked on a piece of sky and a slice of frequency that no one else can ever use again. Think about what that means. The rush to launch is not really about serving customers tomorrow. It is about securing orbital real estate before Western constellations fill every available slot. And China is not doing this with only 2 programs. Alongside Guowang and Xianfan, there are other national efforts in the pipeline, and when you add every planned Chinese low Earth orbit constellation together, the combined target runs to roughly 50,000 satellites. Whether or not they all fly, the filings alone reserve the ground. A frequency you have claimed is one your rival cannot use, no matter how many rockets they own. In a race for a finite resource, showing up early beats showing up biggest. The policy world obsessed over how many satellites China had actually launched, while China quietly filed claims on the sky itself. And this is the part that makes the land grab so hard to reverse. Those orbital slots and frequency rights are governed by international agreement, and once they are locked in, they are extraordinarily difficult to claw back. There is no simple mechanism to tell a country it has claimed too much sky. The most useful orbits, the low ones that give fast, responsive connections, are also the most crowded, and every operator wants the same narrow bands. So the contest is not really about who has the best satellites flying today. It is about who has legally staked out the room to fly tomorrow. By the time the West fully registered that this was even a competition, China had already planted its flags across huge stretches of orbit and spectrum. You cannot outlaunch a claim that was filed before you started paying attention, and that, more than any single satellite, is how you quietly win a race nobody realized had started. So how big could this actually get? It is important to stay grounded, because there are real limits and real reasons for caution. Scale is still China's biggest weakness, and it will not vanish overnight. Launching 13,000 satellites, let alone 28,000 across both networks, demands a launch cadence China has not yet proven it can sustain, especially without the cheap reusable rockets that make SpaceX so efficient. The failures that paused deployment in 2025 were a real warning, and convincing 30 countries to sign letters of intent is a very different thing from delivering reliable service to millions of paying customers across all of them, day after day, for years. But even with all those caveats, the direction of travel is unmistakable, and that is what should make people sit up. For years, the entire framing of this race rested on a simple assumption. Satellite internet is a business. The biggest fleet wins, and whoever launches the most controls the sky. In a matter of months, a program that was supposed to be hopelessly behind proved that framing wrong. It turned internet from space into a question of national sovereignty, signed up a large slice of the world that specifically wants an alternative to American control, and quietly staked its claim on the orbits and frequencies everyone else will need. The satellite count says China is losing. The map of who is signing deals, who is filing for spectrum, and who is quietly mastering the hard technology says something very different. And that is exactly why nobody saw it coming, because everyone was watching the wrong number. If this changed how you think about the sky above your head and who really controls it, give the video a like and subscribe for more stories about the technologies quietly reshaping the world. Turn on notifications so you never miss one. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If the real race was never about satellite count at all, what other contests do you think we are all measuring the completely wrong way right now?